No one in that cafeteria had any idea that within seconds, a harmless taunt would turn into the most talked about moment in the entire penitentiary. And once you take a closer look at what really happened there, you'll understand why no one ever dared underestimate the man who sat eating in silence that day. Iron Vale Prison had always been a place where respect wasn't earned with words. It was earned through displays of power. And on that day, the center of this chaotic stage was a cold steel table lit by the harsh glare of ceiling floodlights. To the right, a massive tattooed veteran known by everyone as Rocco Lion Fist Malone approached with heavy steps and a grin dripping with arrogance. To the left, the new guy in the green uniform, Jin Seo, ate his sandwich calmly, as if completely unaware of the danger walking straight toward him. The tension was so thick, it practically vibrated off the walls. Several inmates stopped chewing. A few guards exchanged quick, startled glances. The air seemed frozen halfway in. No one dared breathe too loudly. Because Rocco wasn't just big. He was a force of nature inside that prison. The self-proclaimed owner of the cafeteria, of the unwritten rules, of the fear that kept most inmates far from him. Whenever he chose someone as a target, the ending was always the same: public humiliation. And at that moment, Jin was the target. But there was something off, something no one could quite explain. As the bully walked closer, lifting a jug of milk with every intention of turning the newcomer into a joke, Jin remained exactly as he was, steady, calm, centered on his meal. You could notice the way he held the sandwich, the flawless posture, the slow, measured breathing, as if he were anywhere else but inside a dangerous prison, seconds away from being taunted by the most feared man in the place. When the jug tipped, the milk poured out in a white cascade. Guards widened their eyes, inmates jerked their heads up, a few even choked on their food. Everyone expected Jin to react with fear, anger, confusion, anything. But he didn't move. He didn't look away. He didn't show a single ounce of rage. He just kept eating, and that was what changed everything. Because in a place like Iron Vale, no one stays indifferent to a public humiliation. And no one stares down a bully known for breaking men without blinking. Jin's calmness didn't look like bravery. It looked like control. It looked like calculation. It looked like something far deeper than anyone there was prepared to understand. Rocco, a man used to dominating every room he walked into, didn't expect that reaction. The complete absence of fear cut through his posture like an invisible blade. For a moment, brief but unmistakable, his expression tightened. Not in anger, but in doubt. It was as if, for the first time in years, he felt the possibility that maybe he wasn't dealing with a regular rookie. And the others noticed it too. One of the older inmates muttered something that made the whole table next to him go cold. "He's not normal. Look at the way he's sitting." Another added, "That guy doesn't care about Rocco at all. Nobody's ever done that before." The cafeteria cameras captured every second. You could see guards leaning forward, ready to intervene if things spiraled out of control. Security staff stared without blinking. The surveillance room had probably zoomed in, all because of that earth-shaking silence coming from one single man. When Jin finally lifted his eyes, something shifted in the room. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't defiance. It was something far more unsettling. The sense that he was analyzing every detail, every movement, every expression, like someone who had lived through moments like this hundreds of times, someone who knew exactly what he was doing. And suddenly, the entire cafeteria understood. Rocco hadn't provoked a rookie. He had provoked the wrong man. And even worse, he had provoked someone who wasn't afraid, because he had no reason to be. That realization spread through the inmates like electricity. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the sound of milk dripping onto the floor. And while Rocco struggled to regain the confidence of his theatrical gesture, everyone there, without exception, felt the same thing. The prison hierarchy was about to change, and what would happen after that moment would be remembered by everyone, guards, inmates, veterans, and newcomers alike, as the day a bully's arrogance placed him face to face with the most dangerous man in the entire institution. The cafeteria was still dead silent when Jin set down the rest of his sandwich on the plate. There was no rush, no tension in his face, just a serenity that clashed with everything happening around him. To anyone watching from afar, that kind of calm would have seemed impossible. But to those standing there face to face with the moment, the feeling was unanimous that calmness carried danger. Iron Veil was a prison known for shaping men through force. But every now and then, someone arrived who didn't need to be shaped, someone who came in already forged. And on that day, for the first time, many began to wonder who Jin Seo really was. The halls of Iron Veil were famous for carrying stories that never reached official reports, stories about power collapses, unexpected alliances, silent betrayals, and enigmatic figures who appeared without explanation. And Jin fit that category perfectly. He arrived quietly, no flexing, no aggressive posture, no attempt to impress anyone, and that, ironically, was what made him terrifying. What stood out most was the way he moved. Every gesture seemed calculated, like he was anticipating everything around him. He didn't look at the guards the way other inmates did. He didn't seek approval or provoke danger. It was as if he were always 2 steps ahead of everyone, Rocco included. Rocco Malone, on the other hand, was the bully who ruled Iron Veil with brute strength and sheer presence. He didn't need to shout to intimidate. The lion tattoo on his arm wasn't just decoration, it was a warning. He'd controlled the cafeteria for years, commanded respect, and ensured no one challenged him, especially not a newcomer. But in that instant, something inside Rocco started to shift. Jin's lack of fear unnerved him. That serene, almost expressionless gaze made him feel something he wasn't used to feeling: doubt. And that doubt began spreading among the other inmates. That's when one of the old-timers leaned toward the guy beside him and muttered, "I've seen plenty of rookies try to act tough, but I wouldn't go near that one." The other replied quietly, "There's something about him. I don't know what it is, but it's there." The electronic security system was watching everything. In the monitoring room, the cafeteria appeared on split screens. Veteran guards frowned, picking up on what many hadn't fully processed yet. That behavior wasn't normal. That silence wasn't normal. That lack of reaction wasn't human. There was a history behind Jin, one no one there knew. He didn't talk to anyone, didn't share his story, didn't explain why he'd been sent to Iron Veil, and the official documents, rare, incomplete, full of gaps, made it look like he had appeared out of nowhere. Many assumed it was just a bureaucratic glitch. Others thought he was just another transfer, shuffled around due to internal problems. But some guards knew a little more. They remembered a quick, almost secret meeting that took place just hours before Jin arrived. Amid the whispers, only one sentence had come out clearly from the prison warden himself: "Do not provoke this man. He is not like the others." But that warning never reached Rocco's ears, and that would change everything. Rocco slammed the milk jug onto the steel table, trying to reclaim control of the situation. He expected laughter, comments, shouts, but instead he found tense eyes, frightened faces, and guards who looked unsure. He didn't understand why, but everyone else already had. What he'd just done wasn't a simple taunt. It was a strategic mistake. A mistake that put the most feared bully in Iron Veil face to face with someone who should never have been provoked. Slowly, Jin rose from his chair. The movement was measured, deliberate, controlled. Nothing aggressive, nothing exaggerated, but enough to make the room even heavier. Milk soaked his uniform, dripping to the floor. He didn't try to wipe it off. It didn't seem to bother him. It was as if the entire scene held no significance at all, and that indifference was what triggered the real alarm, because dangerous men usually react with explosions. Truly dangerous men react with silence, and Jin's silence was deafening. The breathing of several inmates quickened. Guards slid their hands closer to their radios. Rocco clenched his fists, not out of confidence, but to hide what he was starting to feel. Fear. Iron Veil was about to learn the truth. The bully hadn't picked an ordinary target. He had awakened something far bigger, and by now it was far too late to turn back. The entire cafeteria watched every tiny movement as if the air itself were trapped inside a glass tank ready to burst. Jin rose to his feet slowly, without changing his breathing, without the slightest hint of urgency. He didn't shove the chair back, didn't glare at anyone. Yet that absolute control over himself felt, paradoxically, more threatening than any open attack. In that moment, even the usual clatter of trays being collected faded away. The inmates sitting near the entrance froze, as if a single step might shatter the fragile balance forming between the two men. The tension turned into something almost physical, like a weight everyone was being forced to carry. Rocco, desperate to reclaim his wounded pride, stepped forward. His muscular frame loomed over Jin, casting a shadow that swallowed half the table. But behind all that visible strength, there was something different in the bully's eyes, something no one there was used to seeing. Hesitation. Jin's silence bothered him more than any insult ever could. The lack of fear dismantled every tactic he'd spent years perfecting. He was used to controlling people through their emotional reactions. But in front of Jin, there was no reaction, no anger, no fear, no surprise. Nothing. Jin simply lifted his eyes and looked at Rocco the way someone studies a natural phenomenon. There was no arrogance in that gaze, but no submission either. It was neutral, precise, unsettling. The kind of look that lets you know the person in front of you is seeing you differently, almost clinically. That simple exchange of glances triggered something dangerous. The rest of the inmates understood this wasn't a normal confrontation. There was an undercurrent pulsing beneath the surface, like an invisible electric current rushing through the room. Security noticed it too. On the cameras, the surveillance team zoomed in. Two guards on the right subtly reached for their radios, waiting for instructions. The deputy warden, watching from the upper level behind the reinforced glass, leaned forward with a deep frown. He knew Rocco's history, but he didn't know Jin's, and that alone was enough to worry him. The fight hadn't even started, but the entire prison was already caught inside it. Rocco, used to dominating the cafeteria, tried to reclaim the spotlight with words. "Who do you think you are?" he muttered, forcing authority into his tone. But Jin didn't answer. He simply took a slow breath and adjusted his soaked uniform as if he were getting ready to resume his meal. It was a small gesture, simple, yet enough to ignite something explosive inside the bully. For a man like Rocco, being ignored was worse than being attacked. He stepped in closer, letting the empty milk jug drop onto the table with a metallic clang that echoed across the room. Several inmates flinched instinctively. It was the kind of moment that normally erupted into immediate violence. But Jin didn't move. That absolute calm made many start asking the same question. Why would someone so composed show no fear in front of a man as dangerous as Rocco? And the answer, terrifying as it was, began forming in the minds of a few veterans. They had seen this behavior before, once or twice, during transfers that were never officially acknowledged. People who looked ordinary but carried histories that should never, under any circumstances, be provoked. Rocco, trying to regain emotional control, lifted his chin and stepped even closer. But when he was just inches away, something unexpected happened. Jin tilted his head slightly. It was a tiny movement, almost invisible, but loaded with meaning. It was as if he were evaluating not only Rocco, but everything surrounding them. The exits, the distances, the guards' hand positions, the table layout, the number of inmates, calculating possibilities. That's when a veteran whispered to the man beside him, "He's not scared. He's analyzing." The words spread through the cafeteria instantly. The tension climbed another level. Rocco sensed the shift, and tried to hide his nerves with a short laugh, but no one bought it. He was losing control of the narrative, and in Iron Vale, losing control was the first step toward losing respect and losing your position. The moment was seconds away from detonating when Jin finally moved his hand, slowly and deliberately. He didn't make a threatening gesture. He simply slid his plate a few inches to the side, wiped a bead of milk dripping down his face, and with complete calm, spoke the first words since he had stood up. "Are you done?" The entire cafeteria froze. The sentence was simple, but it carried a silent authority few people had ever witnessed there. It was as if Jin were saying, without raising his voice, that the provocation meant nothing, that he was the one in control, that nothing Rocco had done had affected him in the slightest. That realization rippled through the inmates like a shockwave. Rocco, feeling his pride crumble, stepped back in confusion, unable to decide what to do next. For the first time, he had no ready answer, no way to take back control. And at that moment, everyone understood the same thing. The provocation had been made, the trap was set, and the wrong man had been provoked. While silence dominated the cafeteria, an entire universe of underground stories began shifting around that single confrontation. Iron Vale wasn't just a prison. It was a complex ecosystem built on invisible codes, quiet alliances, old favors, and unwritten pacts. And every one of those forces was about to start revolving around Jin Seo. In the West Block, known for overcrowding and constant turf disputes, groups survived through influence and fear. Some were led by veterans who had never been challenged. Others relied on discreet arrangements with guards. And in every one of these networks, Rocco Malone was a cornerstone, a bully who ruled by intimidation, yes, but who also provided a certain kind of stability. Whenever Rocco was angry, everyone knew to keep their distance. But that day, the whole structure felt weaker. Inmates watched Jin with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. It was impossible not to notice how he stood out in the crowd, even though he wasn't trying to. His calm posture, the way he analyzed the room, his ability to remain unfazed after a public provocation. Everything about him broke the usual patterns of prison behavior. And with it came a question no one wanted to say out loud. Who exactly was this man? That doubt spread through the corridors like a spark in dry straw. In the administrative sector, some guards knew more than they let on. There were confidential reports, files with missing pages, documents with sections blacked out, as if someone had scrubbed Jin's real history from existence. Information circulated only among a small circle of high-ranking officers who repeated one phrase whenever questioned, "He's not someone you provoke." But that warning never reached the inmates, and inside Iron Vale, information was the most valuable currency. As soon as rumors about the cafeteria scene spread, every group formed its own theory. Some believed Jin was ex-military, others swore he had professional combat training. Some said he came from a prison where he'd taken on entire gangs. A few insisted he was part of some government experiment, all speculation born from fear, imagination, and the absence of official answers. But beneath all the guesses, one truth remained. No one wanted to be the first to test him, not after what they'd seen. Meanwhile, in the East Block, a group of veterans watched the situation from a safe distance. Among them was Marlowe Briggs, a prisoner known not for strength, but for strategic intelligence. He was considered the prison's unofficial analyst, not a snitch, but someone who always sensed what was coming before anyone else. He followed patterns, connections, behavior. And today, Jin had become a bright marker on the mental map Marlowe kept of Iron Vale. "This is gonna change everything," Marlowe murmured. "What do you mean?" one of the men beside him asked. "Rocco's never been challenged like this. Ever. And the way the new guy reacted, or didn't react, that got into everyone's head." To Marlowe, what was unfolding wasn't just about Rocco and Jin. It threatened the entire balance of power. If a long-standing bully could be dismantled with a single look, Everything could collapse. Alliances, unspoken rules, hierarchies built over years. Peace in a prison is never real. It's just a fragile truce held together by fear and convenience. Any sudden shift in a central piece could trigger a chain reaction. And Jin had just become exactly that, a piece capable of reshaping the whole board. In the surveillance room, an experienced officer studied the camera feed with unease. Jin seemed to know exactly where every guard stood, where the exits were, where the blind spots were. He positioned his body not by impulse, but by calculation. It was the kind of behavior seen only in people with extremely advanced training designed for survival in hostile environments. The officer exhaled slowly and muttered under his breath, as if afraid someone might hear, "That man is not a civilian." The words hung in the air. Meanwhile, down in the cafeteria, Rocco fought to keep his emotions in check. His position of power was crumbling right in front of everyone, and nothing breaks a bully faster than the realization that his dominance is being questioned. The entire prison was about to feel the impact of that moment, because this wasn't just a fight. It wasn't just a provocation. It was a collision between two completely different worlds, one built on brute strength, the other on calculated calm. And when those two worlds collide, something inevitably breaks. Sooner or later, all of Iron Vale would understand. Jin's arrival wasn't a coincidence. It was the beginning of something much bigger. The next few seconds seemed to move differently, as if time itself had grown heavier inside the cafeteria. You could hear not only the inmates holding their breath, but the faint hum of the security cameras repositioning to follow every movement. Rocco's indestructible facade was starting to crack, not just because of Jin's calm, but because of what that calm represented, a silent kind of power, impossible to ignore. Rocco needed to regain control. That's what he kept repeating to himself. He had to assert dominance somehow, to make sure the entire prison remembered why he was the man who ruled through fear. But every second of hesitation felt like an invisible fall, weakening his position in front of dozens of witnesses. He stepped closer, trying to turn his presence into a threat. But unlike every other inmate, Jin didn't step back, not even an inch. His gaze remained neutral, steady, almost patient, like someone waiting for the exact right moment to move. And that contrast triggered the shift. Jin took a single step forward. There was no explosion of violence, no shout, no shove, just one step. But it was enough to unleash an immediate reaction. Rocco stepped back half a pace, a reflex so automatic his body moved before his mind could stop it. That tiny retreat, small, nearly invisible, hit the cafeteria like a silent grenade. Inmates widened their eyes. Guards leaned forward. Even the surveillance cameras seemed to zoom in. Because, in a place like Iron Vale, a bully known for never giving ground, stepping back from a newcomer, was something that simply did not happen. And yet, it just had. Rocco realized it instantly. He saw the shock on the faces around him, saw the curiosity in the eyes of the other inmates, saw the doubt in the guard's posture, and worst of all, he saw the unbroken serenity on Jin's face. It hit him like an invisible blow. So he did what bullies do when they lose control. He raised his arm, ready for a quick strike, desperate to erase that fraction of a second that had exposed his insecurity. He didn't want to hurt Jin. He wanted to reclaim respect, to wipe away the feeling that he was losing the cafeteria to a newcomer. But before his arm could complete the motion, Jin stopped it, with nothing but a simple gesture. Jin lifted his hand and touched Rocco's forearm, not with force, but with absolute precision, halting the movement before it could gain momentum. There was no aggression, no brute resistance. It was a calculated touch, right on the exact point of the muscle that prevented him from advancing. To the untrained eye, it looked like a basic block. To those with experience, it was far more terrifying. Rocco's arm froze in midair. The reaction was immediate. His tensed muscles, so used to dominating every fight, couldn't overpower that minimal restraint. He tried to pull his arm back, but Jin held him, not with strength, but with technique. The cafeteria held its breath. For 2 full seconds, they stayed that way. Rocco trying to push forward, Jin maintaining the block with ease that defied every visual expectation. It was as if Rocco were fighting an invisible force, and losing. And then Jin did something even more unsettling. He tilted his head slightly, as if observing a technical flaw in a poorly executed move, and said calmly, "Don't do that." The prison froze. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't provocation. It was a fact. The sentence was so direct, so firm, and laced with a kind of authority no one could explain, that even the deputy warden clenched his jaw when he heard it over the monitoring speakers. Rocco tried another move. Fast. Desperate. But Jin simply shifted his left foot, rotated his hip an inch, and with that alone, threw the bully off balance. Rocco's massive body stumbled sideways, slamming hard against the edge of the table. The crowd couldn't hold back the reactions. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "This isn't normal," another muttered. "He dropped Rocco without even hitting him." A third said, stunned. The shift was complete. The bully who ruled Ironvale had been dismantled, not with a punch, but with technique, precision, and calm, qualities almost nobody in that prison respected, until that moment when everyone suddenly feared them. Rocco, still on his feet but breathless, tried to understand what had just happened. His hand trembled. His expression revealed something he had never felt inside those walls. Fear. And in that moment, the entire prison understood something that would change everything. The bully had picked the wrong inmate, and now he was standing face to face with the most dangerous man in the entire penitentiary. Rocco was still trying to regain his balance when the echo of his collision with the table faded across the cafeteria. That metallic sound felt bigger than the room itself, bigger than the bully who caused it. It was the kind of sound that told anyone with experience inside those walls that something serious had just happened, something capable of shifting the entire dynamic of the prison. The inmates didn't know whether to breathe, step back, or try to process what they had just witnessed. The scene replayed in everyone's mind on an endless loop. The precise touch, the block, the simple movement that dismantled years of intimidation. No brute force, no explosions, just pure technique, pure control. And for many in that room, that was far more terrifying than any punch. Some inmates stood without realizing it. Others shrank back as if they had just watched a sleeping animal open its eyes. The veterans, always observant, kept their attention locked on Jin. There was no room for doubt anymore. He wasn't an ordinary newcomer. He didn't behave like someone who needed to prove anything. He didn't react like someone who carried fear. He simply existed, and that alone was a silent threat. Rocco, on the other hand, was experiencing something he had never felt inside Ironvale: exposure. He had always been the man who made others back down. Now he was the one stepping back, trembling, unable to make a decision. The humiliation didn't come from the stumble itself. It came from the fact that Jin had defeated him without breaking a sweat, without losing his breath, without even looking interested in continuing. That detail weighed more than any blow ever could. In the surveillance wing, nervous murmurs buzzed through the room. 5 guards stared at the screens with tense expressions. The supervisor pressed the radio button 3 times before deciding to speak, as if debating whether intervening was even worth it. "Alpha unit, stay alert. Something's off with this newcomer," he said, keeping his voice low and steady. But what they didn't yet know was that intervention wouldn't help. Not because Jin was dangerous in the traditional sense, but because the situation had already passed the point where physical control mattered. What was unfolding was psychological, territorial, structural. The symbolic collapse of the bully's power turned Jin into a new, unpredictable force, and that changed everything. At one of the distant tables, an inmate named Harlan Two Minds Bishop, known for predicting trouble before anyone else, leaned toward the man beside him. "This is the moment the prison changes hands," he murmured. The other inmate's eyes widened. "You really think a newcomer can replace Rocco?" Harlan shook his head. "He doesn't want to own anything, and that's exactly what makes this more dangerous." Meanwhile, Rocco struggled to pull himself together. He wiped sweat from his forehead, took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, anything to regain even a fraction of the respect he'd just lost. But when he looked up, he saw Jin standing still, watching him with the same neutral expression as before, and in that instant, Rocco understood. There was no coming back. There was no regaining what he had lost. The entire prison had seen him retreat. His pride collapsed under dozens of watchful eyes. Jin didn't move forward, didn't threaten, didn't speak again. He simply waited. And that silence, that controlled, calculated silence, was more damning than any punch. That's when the guards finally decided to step in. The side doors opened with a sharp clank, and 4 officers moved in formation. They weren't there to arrest Jin or pull Rocco away from danger. They were there because they understood that after a moment like that, one wrong move could ignite a full-scale riot. And they knew. When a prison hierarchy shifts suddenly, the first hours are the most dangerous. The officer in front raised a hand, trying to maintain visual control of the room. "Separate them, now!" But when they got close, Jin stepped back and raised his hands peacefully, signaling that he wasn't a threat. The guards froze for a fraction of a second, surprised. Instead of resistance, they saw restraint, awareness, discipline. Rocco turned his face away, ashamed. Some inmates pretended they hadn't seen anything. Others stared openly, as if they were watching the birth of a legend. For the first time in minutes, the prison exhaled. But even as the tension began to settle, a single thought started spreading across the tables, through the hallways, into the cells, silent but powerful. If he did that to Rocco, imagine what he could do to anyone else in here. Iron Veil got the message. And from that moment on, Jin wasn't just another name on the new arrivals list. He was the presence no one would ever dare underestimate again. As the guards separated Jin and Rocco, the atmosphere inside Iron Veil began shifting in a deep, unsettling way. It wasn't a loud change, nor was it an obvious rebellion. It was something quieter, more psychological, something that seeped into the inmates' minds and shook the prison's invisible structures. Jin didn't ask for anything. He didn't demand respect, didn't look down on anyone, didn't try to turn the moment into an advantage. If anything, he walked away from the tension with the same calm he had before being provoked. His uniform was still stained with milk, but he didn't seem to care. His attention was elsewhere, rooted in a kind of inner focus that very few men in Iron Veil possessed. He walked to the metal sink near the wall, turned on the faucet, and rinsed his face with slow, deliberate movements. The sound of running water broke the silence around him. His breathing remained steady, as if nothing had happened. As if confronting the prison's bully had been just another irrelevant detail of the day. But while he composed himself, something telling happened. No one approached him, not out of blind fear, but out of instinctive caution. It was as if the inmates could see an invisible wall around Jin, a barrier built not from strength, but from discipline. Jin was different, and everyone now understood that. In the corner of the cafeteria, Marlowe, the most observant inmate in the block, watched every move with sharp intensity. He saw something the others couldn't name yet. And when Jin finally turned off the faucet and wiped his face, Marlowe murmured to himself, "He holds back, but he knows exactly what he's doing." That observation seemed simple, but it wasn't. In Iron Veil, self-control was a rare power. Those who lost their temper didn't last long. Those who used force without thinking were quickly crushed by the environment. But those who stayed composed in the middle of chaos, those men were feared and respected. And Jin was exactly That kind of man. When he returned to the table, he noticed someone had left a clean tray in place of his, replacing the one soaked in milk. There was no note, no direct eye contact, but the message was clear: silent respect, the strongest kind in a place like this. Some inmates looked away when Jin walked by. Others watched him closely, as if trying to decipher a code. There was curiosity, yes, but there was also admiration. The kind of admiration no bully inside Iron Veil had ever inspired. Rocco, for instance, inspired fear. Jin inspired something far rarer, trust. Even inmates who had never spoken to him could sense a different kind of strength in him. Not destructive, constructive. The strength of someone who had lived far more battles than he showed. When mealtime ended, and the inmates began lining up to return to their blocks, something subtle but powerful unfolded. One of the veteran prisoners, known as Ox, stopped beside Jin in the line. Ox was big, strong, respected, and he rarely spoke to anyone he didn't know. "Hey," he murmured, without looking directly at Jin. "What you did back there, nobody does that, not even the guards." Jin stayed silent. He didn't need to respond. Ox continued, "I don't know who you are, but..." He took a deep breath. "I don't want to be your enemy." It was an unexpected admission from someone who almost never showed vulnerability, but Jin simply nodded, acknowledging the gesture without turning it into a spectacle. That was the moment many realized. Leadership wasn't shifting because Jin wanted it. It was shifting because Iron Veil needed someone like him. Marlowe, walking a few steps behind, watched the interaction with a look that mixed intrigue and unease. He was smart enough to know men like Jin didn't appear without reason. And when he stepped closer, he asked the question most were afraid to voice. "What were you out there?" Jin turned just enough so Marlowe could meet his eyes, and in that brief exchange there was a weight that felt enormous. Marlowe sensed he was looking at a man who carried stories he could never truly imagine. Jin answered with a single sentence, "Just someone who learned how to survive." And that was enough, because inside Iron Veil, surviving meant far more than staying alive. It meant facing shadows, resisting pressure, enduring chaos, and keeping your mind intact. Jin had become a symbol of silent resilience. The guards, meanwhile, started keeping their distance, not out of fear, but out of caution. They knew, even if they didn't admit it, that real danger doesn't come from men who scream. It comes from the ones who observe, the ones who measure, the ones who choose the right moment. Jin's reputation spread through the corridors, through the cells, through whispered conversations at night, but it wasn't a reputation built on violence. It was built on discipline, control, posture, and for the first time, some inmates began asking themselves, was Jin not only the most dangerous man in Iron Veil, but also the one the prison needed most? The cafeteria had been the beginning. Now the entire prison was beginning to witness his rise. Night fell over Iron Veil like a heavy veil. The prison, normally loud during shift changes, felt strangely quiet. Guards walked with restrained steps, inmates spoke in low tones, and even the metallic clatter of automatic doors seemed softer, almost hesitant. But it wasn't the darkness people feared. It was what had happened in the cafeteria and what might come next. Everyone knew that when a man like Rocco is humiliated in public, the entire prison shifts into a state of alert. A wounded bully is unpredictable. He might try to reclaim territory by force, forge desperate alliances, cash in old favors from other inmates, or even involve corrupt guards to tip the scales. And every one of those paths led to dangerous scenarios. Iron Veil was now wrapped in a strange, tense silence, the kind that precedes strategic movement. Jin, meanwhile, walked toward his cell with the same calm he had displayed all day. He wasn't someone who looked over his shoulder. He didn't pick up his pace. His breathing didn't change. He moved with total awareness of his surroundings and total command of himself. The contrast unsettled the other inmates. When Jin stepped into the main corridor of cell block C, he noticed several doors slightly cracked open, revealing pairs of watchful eyes. Prisoners who usually ignored newcomers now studied every move he made, as if watching a story unfold in real time. Jin didn't look at any of them. His focus was inward, almost meditative, but someone else watched him with a different kind of interest. Marlowe. The analytical inmate walked a few steps behind, not bothering to hide the fact that he was studying Jin. Marlowe understood patterns better than anyone, and right now he saw one forming. A dangerous, powerful, inevitable pattern. When he got closer, he spoke softly. "You know he's not gonna let this go, right?" Jin didn't stop walking. "That's not up to me," he replied calmly. The sentence hit Marlowe like a warning. It didn't sound like fear or provocation. It was simply a truth. Jin understood clearly that the fall of a bully creates a vacuum, and that vacuum pulls conflict toward it. When Jin reached his cell, he closed the door without rushing. No abrupt movements, no hint of tension. Just the metallic click echoing down the hallway. The inmates watched, waiting for a sign of weakness, something to suggest he might be worried about retaliation. There was nothing. He sat on the bed, took a long breath, and closed his eyes for a moment. It wasn't exhaustion, it was strategy. Jin was preparing for something that hadn't begun yet, but that he knew would come. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the prison, Rocco Malone moved in a completely opposite state. He stalked the corridors like a wounded animal searching for somewhere to bite. His broken pride had turned into rage. His steps echoed aggressively, and his heavy shoulders exposed the weight of humiliation. And unlike Jin, Rocco couldn't think clearly. He visited old allies, spoke with longtime members of his group, asked for favors. Some tried to convince him to let it go, but Rocco wasn't built that way. He didn't accept weakness. He didn't accept being seen as someone who backed down, especially not in front of a newcomer. But the problem was bigger than he realized. Those who once feared him were now hesitating. "You didn't see the way he stopped you, Rocco," one veteran muttered, avoiding eye contact. "He froze you like nothing," another added. Those words stabbed into his pride like needles. He hadn't just been stopped, he'd been dismantled in front of everyone. That left him caught between raw fury and silent panic. At the same time, in Block C, 3 inmates whispered among themselves, "If Rocco goes after him, it's gonna get bad for all of us. That new guy, he ain't normal. This is gonna turn into a war." The word war echoed through the walls, even spoken so quietly. Ironvale knew that an internal war could turn any unit into chaos, and many feared Jin and Rocco were headed exactly toward that, even if only one of them fully understood the situation. When the corridor lights shut off, signaling the start of the night routine, the prison sank into a calculated darkness. Only the dim glow of motion sensors offered enough light to make out shapes. A guard passed by periodically, but even his footsteps seemed unsure in front of the closed doors. And then, inside cell 318, Jin opened his eyes. He had felt it. Not fear, not anxiety, anticipation. Something was shifting in Ironvale's structure, alliances, tensions, silent reactions. He knew Rocco was planning something. Knew the other inmates were choosing sides, knew the guards were alert, but not nearly alert enough to stop what was coming, and he knew the moment of truth was approaching. The cafeteria confrontation had only been the beginning. Now Ironvale was moving toward a boiling point, and once that point was reached, there would be no more doubts. Only one of them would walk out of this storm, holding the prison's unofficial leadership. The early hours of the morning had their own rhythm in Ironvale. Guards' footsteps echoing through the halls, automatic doors locking into place, muffled voices drifting between cells. But that night, something was different. The silence wasn't just the absence of sound, it was a warning, the kind of silence an entire prison recognizes instantly. Someone was about to do something reckless. Jin sat on his bunk, posture flawless, attentive to everything. There was no anxiety in his eyes, no impatience, only vigilance, the calm awareness of someone who already knew the final moment was approaching. And he was right. In the West Block, Rocco Malone had finally gathered his allies. 4 strong men used to settling conflicts through brute force. They walked the hallway with synchronized steps, like a thick shadow advancing against the light. No one spoke. Their faces carried the same expression: anger born of loyalty, fear disguised as pride, and a sick certainty that if they didn't stand with the bully now, they would lose their place forever. Rocco led the group, eyes bloodshot, voice caught in his throat. He didn't just want revenge. He wanted his image back, his reputation, his territory. He wanted to erase the cafeteria scene that still burned in everyone's memory. "Tonight it ends," he murmured. "It ends my way." The words echoed down the hallway, heavy with desperate determination. Meanwhile, in Block C, Marlowe watched from the barred window of his cell. He saw the group approaching in the distance and felt a chill crawl down his spine. This wasn't just payback, it was an execution waiting to happen. "They're going all the way," he whispered to himself, "but they have no idea who they're dealing with." And he was right. Rocco and his men stopped in front of cell 318. The hallway was empty. It was the middle of the night, the perfect moment for a fast, quiet attack that no one could interfere with. The plan was simple: intimidate, assault, crush any chance Jin had of becoming an influential name inside Iron Vale. Rocco pounded on the metal door with a closed fist. The metallic echo traveled through the entire block. The sound felt like a verdict being announced. "Jin!" the bully shouted. "Open this door, now!" No response. He slammed the door again, harder this time, like he wanted to bring the whole structure down. "We've got business to settle," Rocco roared, "and it happens right here, right now." Inside the cell, Jin stayed seated for a few seconds, listening to every voice, every footstep, every breath outside. Only when silence settled again did he rise, calmly, without urgency, as if someone had simply knocked at his front door. He walked to the door and pressed the internal button that unlocked the gate during night inspections, something that only opened when the system detected authorized movement. But for some reason, that night, the mechanism slid open without hesitation. The door opened with a slow, grinding creak, and what happened next made the entire corridor hold its breath. Jin stood in the doorway, posture relaxed, expression neutral. He didn't look threatened. He didn't look surprised. He simply existed there, and somehow that was enough to destabilize the entire group. Rocco felt his heart speed up against his will. It was the first time he faced Jin without a crowd around, without witnesses who could pull him out if things went wrong, and he realized in that moment that Jin's calm meant one very clear thing. Jin wasn't getting ready to fight. Jin had been ready for a long time. "You think you can humiliate me and just walk back to your cell?" Rocco growled, stepping forward. Jin didn't respond. His silence was sharper than any blade ever confiscated in Iron Vale. Rocco raised his arm, ready for the first strike. His men advanced with him, forming a tight circle, blocking every possible exit. They didn't want a chance. They wanted to crush Jin. But that's when everything changed. Jin made one movement. Just one. A short step to the side, quick, fluid, as if he had rehearsed that moment his entire life. Rocco lunged and hit nothing. His first swing cut through empty air. Jin slipped past him with a minimal, calculated turn. The bully staggered forward, thrown off by his own momentum. Before he could recover, Jin caught his wrist and rotated his shoulder in one precise, technical motion. Rocco's massive body dropped to his knees, not violently, but inevitably. The other 4 men hesitated for just a second, but it was enough. Jin looked at them without emotion, without expanding his movements, without raising his voice. He simply aligned his posture in a way that made everything clear. If they tried, they would fall the same way. One by one, Rocco's allies stepped back, not out of cowardice, but instinct. They felt something they couldn't rationalize, not fear of pain, fear of certainty. The certainty that they were facing someone who could defeat all of them without needing to hurt any of them. Rocco, still on his knees, tried to stand, but Jin placed a hand on his shoulder. Just one. And that was enough to freeze him from the inside. The bully felt his breath break, not because Jin applied force, but because he had no idea what Jin would do next. And then Jin finally spoke. "It's over." A simple phrase. But spoken in that silent hallway, it carried more weight than any court sentence. Rocco lowered his head, not because he was forced, but because he understood he couldn't win. Inmates watched everything through the small cell windows, and what they saw that night would become legend inside Iron Vale. There were no screams, no blood, no fight. There was only a man who, without anger and without effort, demonstrated what real power looked like. And from that moment on, everyone understood. The bully provoked the wrong inmate and ended up on his knees before the most dangerous man in the entire prison. Dawn crept over Iron Vale slowly, painting the sky with a pale orange glow that slipped through the barred windows of the prison. But that morning, the sunlight didn't bring relief. It brought memories. Memories of the silent night when the prison's hierarchy changed forever. The hallways, usually chaotic, were strangely orderly. Inmates walked without shoving, without loud talk, without aggressive banter. It was as if an unspoken agreement had been made during the night, as if everyone understood that a new force had emerged among them. A quiet, disciplined presence they could not ignore. And above all, there was something no one dared say aloud. Rocco Malone was no longer the name that made Iron Vale tremble. By sunrise, rumors were already spreading through the units. Rumors about what had really happened in Block C during the night. Some swore Jin had dismantled the bully with some unknown technique. Others claimed the four men backing Rocco stepped back before even trying to strike. There were even those who insisted Jin hadn't needed to move at all, that one look was enough to make them give up. But the truth was much simpler and yet far deeper. Jin didn't defeat Rocco with strength. He defeated him with calm, with discipline, with absolute control. And that was the hardest part for people to accept. In the cafeteria, Rocco's symbolic territory, everyone held their breath, waiting to see what would happen when Jin walked in. Some believed he would take the bully's place. Others thought he would claim leadership, set new rules, demand respect. But when Jin entered the dining hall that morning, he simply walked to the most discreet table, sat alone, and began eating as if nothing had happened. No posturing, no power display, no staring anyone down. And because of that, the respect grew even more. His strength didn't depend on an audience. His presence alone was enough. Rocco appeared minutes later, his eyes downcast, his shoulders slumped, like a man who for the first time in years felt the weight of humility. He didn't go near Jin, didn't confront him, didn't try to reclaim territory. He walked to a different table in silence, without lifting his head. In that moment, Iron Vale understood the magnitude of what had happened. There was no shouting, no war, no takeover. There was simply a shift, profound, inevitable, almost spiritual. And the most remarkable part, it happened without violence. Marlowe, seated a few tables back, watched Jin with thoughtful eyes. He shook his head slowly, as if finally understanding a puzzle too complex to solve at first glance. He didn't want the top, he murmured. He just wanted peace. But in places like Iron Vale, peace is a rare privilege, and only the most dangerous men ever managed to reach it. The guards, meanwhile, were uneasy. Many began watching Jin more closely throughout the morning, not out of fear, but recognition. They knew men like him didn't appear by accident. Someone like Jin wasn't shaped by ordinary life. There were deep stories behind that razor-sharp calm, and even without saying it aloud, they knew he represented something important: order. For the first time in months, there were no fights that morning, no clashes between rival groups, no hallway commotions. Iron Vale breathed, Jin hadn't become the leader, but he had become the axis, the reference point, the balance, the man who, without wanting, changed the entire prison simply by existing as he was. And when the announcement marking the end of mealtime echoed through the hall, everyone saw something they had never seen before. Jin stood up, adjusted his uniform, walked toward the door, and passed between the guards without being eyed as a threat. Passed by inmates without being seen as a rival, passed by Rocco without hostility. He simply moved forward, a man who never sought power, and precisely because of that, earned respect. Iron Veil learned a harsh and permanent truth. There are bullies, there are leaders, and then there are men so dangerous they need none of those titles. Jin was that kind of man, and his name would never be forgotten. Days later, Iron Veil was no longer the same. The corridors were quieter, conflicts dwindled, and even the guards walked with less tension. Jin's name circulated in whispers, not as a threat, but as a reminder of what everyone had witnessed. A man who won without violence, who commanded respect without demanding it, who carved out space without trying to dominate anyone. Rocco kept his distance, quieter than ever, carrying a new kind of understanding. And Jin, faithful to his silence, continued living each day as if nothing had happened. But everyone knew. Everything had changed. If this story held your attention all the way to the end, imagine the ones still to come. Intense stories, full of twists, tension, emotion, and unforgettable characters. Exactly the kind you love. So don't leave without doing your part. Hit the like button because it helps the channel reach more people. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and ring the bell so you don't miss a single new episode. And of course, drop a comment below. Which part of this story surprised you the most? Your feedback helps shape the next script. Now, get ready. The next story is already on the way.